Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is the Government Blockchain Association's Healthcare and Life Sciences Working Group monthly public webinar. I'm Heather Flannery. I'm honored to chair the Healthcare and Life Sciences Working Group, and I'm your friendly host for this show series. I am really excited to introduce two esteemed speakers and from GBA member company, Vanadium. And before we get started with that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you are participating via Zoom, we'd love to have your questions and we can take Q&A during the end of the event. We are going to be recording this and it will be available for redistribution later. And you can find us every third Wednesday at this time. And we are now ready to begin. I would love to start with you, Walt. Tell us about yourself. What brought you to Vanadium? How did you get started? And more. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with fellow GBA members and the audience that's attending today. My name is Walt Rampata. My background is about 30 years. I hate to even date myself. Focused primarily on marketing and growth of companies. I got the bug to become an entrepreneur very early in life, and so in many ways, I'm the cliche serial entrepreneur, and this is number 7 or 8. I lose track, and to that event, most of the focus has been around trying to shift or change some monumental challenges over the different companies. And specifically with Vanadium, we started this journey. We're going on our 5th year this fall. And through that process, our initial focus came out of some learnings that myself and one of our other co-founders had struggled with in another industry that we were at the time working together in. Not together as in same company, but together being in the same industry. And that was the burgeoning medical cannabis industry, which, if anybody knows anything about that industry, has lots and lots of challenges and lots of nuances that are very specific to an industry that's coming out of almost 80 years of prohibition. And specific to trying to, for both me and my co-founder, Rick, we were looking to try and understand more about the wellness factor that was coming out of that industry and how do we apply that to personal challenges. How do we get to a place where we're getting the data, the notification, the understandings, the details behind what this plant was doing in an evidence-based, trackable fashion that we could then take to people like our parents, who in many ways were struggling with even the concept of this plant being even legalized. So understanding some of the challenges and trying to get to that information, it also became problematic for many of the patients in that industry who, quite frankly, don't want to be understood, meaning they need or want to remain anonymous. So how do we get valuable data out of people that want to remain anonymous? And it's still a challenge today, especially when we involve some of the veterans groups, the minority groups that really don't want their names in a system that could then impact other benefits that they're receiving in other places. So initially, we started Vanadium with the hope that the idea of trying to get to a place where we could provide data sovereignty, some level of ownership and protection to those that were originating the information, so that in the process of originating it, they themselves had some right to it, but additionally some protections around it that allowed them to then still operate. And so hence began the journey with Vanadium, with our North Star being around data sovereignty. And consequently, given our backgrounds and giving that focus, patient portability and the hospital and the healthcare world has always been a real focus for us. Further moving into what we're going to talk about today, to be able to actually service the industry, you got to have ingredients, and those ingredients are the physicians, the nurses, the doctors, and the administrative staff that makes that possible. And so we can't even get to a place of patient portability if we don't have the fundamental support staff to service the industry. So working backwards almost through the funnel to solve that problem. Many ways today we're focusing on that piece that feeds the industry, the credentialing part. So long-winded way of explaining, how I got to here, but that's kind of how in that regard is our focus around credentialing.
Thank you so much, Walt. You have a fascinating background, and Vanadium's origin story always is interesting to me every time I've had the opportunity to hear it. Uh, so much of what is achieved in a new business has to do with its momentum and trajectory and the passions of its founders. So thank you for sharing that. On the topic of provider credentialing, here in our working group, it is so consistent with an ongoing theme around the mitigation and prevention of waste, fraud, and abuse in healthcare settings. And that's one of the major intersection points with this opportunity here that I'm excited for us to unpack today. And next, my second extremely esteemed speaker. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you. My name is Laura Fredericks. I'm Chief Growth Officer and co-founder at Vanadium. So heading up sales and marketing and really all of our growth efforts as we move from kind of seed stage to commercialized product. We are, I, like Walt, have kind of a long, long history in startups, which is, I don't know, either an affliction or maybe it's just, it's something we keep coming back to. There's got to be a great word for it that doesn't sound quite so bad. Heather has one.
Can I interrupt with my contribution to that? I
Yeah.
believe entrepreneurship is an undiagnosed psychopathology.
I
Some
like
of us
that.
some of us have it. It's presently incurable.
Love it.
And here in the healthcare and life sciences working group, I think that is an appropriate moniker for
Yeah,
for us to wear.
I
Over
love
to you.
that. I have said that it's just a magic combination of zeal, coffee, and ADHD. Um,
That's
but
good too.
looks different for everyone. I was a biopsych and neuroscience major, so the brain geek in me is very, very excited about that as the way we describe it. Um, so had the affliction for quite a while, or the undiagnosed psychopathology. Basically joined or started my first startup right after college, and have had five as founder or co-founder, and then was a head of marketing for a long time, and a fractional CMO for a long time. I had a little bit of a stint in bigger companies. I was over at Kraken Digital Asset Exchange, running their product marketing on the consumer side for about a year, and just witnessing the hyper scaling that happened while I was there was um, just truly mind blowing. Just seeing how something that is so um, consequential for a lot of people. 7, 8 million people in the world were seeing our messaging and were kind of interacting with us in various ways, and just seeing kind of the scale of that and seeing the scale of the spread of blockchain and of crypto was super interesting. Um, and then after that, went to a smaller exchange, and ran marketing there, and then kind of met up with the Vanadium folks through that angle, through the kind of blockchain angle, and was really interested in the non-crypto uses for blockchain and how it could start to be used for moving, storing, sharing, monetizing data. To me, that was way more exciting than crypto. I think crypto has a lot of interesting uses in the world. But when I start to think about data, that's kind of our new economy, right? That and attention, information and attention are kind of our two scarce resources at this point. Um, Maybe information is not the scarce resource, maybe attention is, but I think that the way that we're able to apply a blockchain infrastructure to places like healthcare is really interesting. Like being able to bring together so many different data sets and make them move in real time and essentially make a lot of the back office systems in a lot of industries, but especially healthcare, work better. Reducing administrative costs, reducing overhead, and just making things a little bit more efficient, I think has been super interesting to see kind of how we've gone down that path.
Yeah, absolutely. There's our industry in healthcare is still functioning on very old rails in business and economic structures that have been getting stale at least. There's certainly tremendous opportunity. I've share your passion in those areas of seeing data as an asset class that if it is financialized separately from the equities of the originators of data and in a way that can include individual data subjects. I mean, that's a holy grail opportunity that we have at this intersection of Web3 and blockchain and healthcare. So much transformational change could be brought about by making that real in the world. So it's really an honor to have the opportunity to speak with you, Laura and Walt, about your work at Vanadium and your plans. Um, what I'd love to do is start by unpacking a bit more about the product stack that characterizes Vanadium, because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have a series of distinct offerings that all interoperate with each other and play a distinct and important role in that vision that you just outlined, Laura, of being able to activate data in these healthy new ways uh, that you described. Maybe Walt, I could direct first to you. Kind of the first challenge to unpack is that you've got this ocean of data everywhere, largely coming from the edge at an ever increasing rate relative to other, let's say, behind four walls, enterprise origin points. Um, a first principle is how do you know what's going on from a data perspective? I mean, I think that's one of the first uh, areas that you built, specifically what is called Vanadium Shield, right?
Right.
Maybe tell us more about that.
So interestingly enough, as we marched into this journey of ours and trying to reach data sovereignty, some of the equations that we marched through was, first and foremost, how do we get that data? How does it come into the mix? How do we handle it? And one of the real things that separates us from other organizations is not just how we ingest it, but it's also the speed at which we work. Because the real part of this equation that differentiates our journey from many others is that we recognize if we were to truly provide data sovereignty as a core concept to humanity as a whole, as a big goal, we got to get to a place where we're interacting with humanity in human time, for lack of a better word, real time. We don't sit here and wait 30 seconds and then talk, and then we interact in real time. So how do we get to that place where we're also capturing what's happening out there at that same speed? And then not just capturing it, moving it around to where it's protected or stored in that same speed as well. So uh, I'll let Laura talk a little bit more about how we do that. But the first order of business for us was, okay, we've got lots of stuff happening out there. How do we get that into a quasi-centralized place where it's got some value? And that exercise led us to develop our what we call our shield. And it's both a visual cue and also a technical cue for us, whereby if you were to envision a shield sticking it out in front of yourself, it's got a flat surface that protects or irradiates in front of a half circle of information or stuff coming at it. with our Shield, very similarly, we've got sensors that I would say are part of that outside shield that are connecting to all the data ports that makes up who somebody is, or makes up whatever that organization might be. So, in our case, our ultimate goal was to provide this to all of humanity, but understanding that humanity interacts with the business world, this is also, contextually useful in that setting as well. So whatever data that organization, namely in this case, a healthcare system, would need to operate, we set up sensors that are connecting effectively and compliantly, taking the most important data from those sensors that they want to act on or they want to monitor and bringing it into the rest of our ecosystem. And with that, I'll pass it off to Laura because she can describe the rest, how all the wires connect.
Sure. And I think one of the things to point out specifically for the healthcare space is we have a lot of advisors on our team that are healthcare professionals that have, made their careers trying to figure out how to fix some of the issues in healthcare, how to move it forward. The resounding phrase from all of them was, you cannot fix interoperability by going into the existing systems. You can't do it. And if you're asking people to replace existing systems, you're going to fail. So we very quickly realized that we needed a way to sit underneath existing systems and listen to them in real time and give that data back in real time, but not change anything that's happening in the EMR system, or in all the versions of the EMR system that a health system might be using. If they're using 3 to 6 versions of Epic or Cerner or whatever, we just sit underneath all of those and we listen. That's where we start. So that's what Shield does, is attach a listener to any of those data streams that are coming in so that we have a real-time twin of all of the data that's coming in, but in a HIPAA compliant way, because we're just pointing to it with a hash. The metadata is all that's stored on chain, not the personal health information.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. And bringing that back to the function of provider credentialing and imagining these vital actors in the healthcare ecosystem. Let's imagine an emergency department physician, just as a for instance. This my interpretation, hearing you and also admitting I shared part of this vision with you as well. This is taking that human being and making them a trusted endpoint and allowing when a provider credentialing solution is in place over and above Shield, Vanadium Shield, and the other areas, making it such that it is as if that individual provider, using blockchain language, is an oracle for every piece of data that is happening under their authority within their clinical mandate. And imagining that implication for waste, fraud, and abuse, which almost very frequently involves imitating a provider, and being able to get away with that because we publish almost all the data necessary to do that is publicly available information. So we make it pretty easy for the bad guys in that way. Go ahead, Laura. What were you going to say?
I was absolutely gonna just double down on that, of the way that we've been thinking about it and that others have been thinking about it in the industry, is the idea of self-sovereign identity. So now you have something where you attest and say, okay, this is me, this is my diploma, this is my whatever certification it is, and you get around this absolutely giant problem of credential fraud. I mean, it's a $7 billion problem in the world right now, right? It's not small. There are credential shops that are very, very large that have many, many people working for them, creating fake credentials all day, every day. And having something that you can verify quickly means that people can actually trust each other. Right now, healthcare systems and insurers do their own credentialing checks. They're completely separate. They don't talk to each other. No one trusts each other. So they're actually doing the credentialing process twice at least. And it's costing what, $9,000-$10,000 a day per provider. So you're talking average 190 to 120 days right now for average credentialing cycle. You've got like 120K being spent per provider. And they're like, just because they're sitting on the bench, they're not being able to work. It's insane.
Yep. It's a fascinating financial sinkhole to imagine that you can't initiate credentialing until a person is employed
Yeah.
or under contract, and neither can you have any connection to their production, their economic production, their revenue cycle until after they're credentialed. And oh, by the way, all that Laura just had to say. It takes weeks to months, and it represents not a singular process, but a process at the provider org and potentially every payer that would be part of that mix. It's a
Well, let's be
Doing
clear.
it once.
absolutely. Sorry, Walt. Yes.
Some of the challenge is not even, the time. It's the acceptance. It's the embracing of a new methodology. I mean, was talking with a CNA last week that still does credentialing via paper, spreadsheet and paperwork. And, you know, she was a member of a hospital organization that was almost 5,000 employees. Like, blows my mind that, you've got that size and scale of an organization today, and you're putting that much human capacity and resources around this one issue, but at the same time, that amount of human touch and propensity for potential error, and delay and backlog and other things that come at us as humans. So some of it is very much the challenge of how do we get that information from point A to point B, and that's one part of the challenge. The other part of it is they got to be willing, the system, the industry as a whole. Some of our challenge too is there's a better, newer way. Are you willing to adopt to that and get to a place where now, instead of having to make sure that spreadsheet is with you at all times and in a fire safe vault, because God forbid. So that's, again, I wanted to raise that because that's some of the challenge that we're facing as well. It's not just the adoption of technology, or not just the implementation, it's also the adoption.
Absolutely. And if I may pile on just a little bit, this is in the United States, this is largely regulated at a state level, and state by state will have a variety of different micro rules for different category of healthcare stakeholders. And then individual institutions within those varying regulatory bounds develops distinct policy that then has to be enforced and made verifiable and so on. Fascinatingly, let's imagine a bunch of blockchain folks listening to this, you would be surprised what the current state of the trust model actually is. It's analogous to the reason that we send billions of faxes a year in the US health economy. And it's because of the trust model. It's because a fax machine in a locked closet with a single phone number becomes a trusted endpoint. And that's why. So it's not because a specific credential, say a diploma or a license, is proven to be not a deep fake. On the contrary, there's no cryptographic verification of the underlying assets almost ever. It can be literally because Sally picked up the phone and reached another human being in a department at a state government or a university or you name it and logged the call. And there's no verification that the call ever happened. There's no proof that even Sally exists at all as an employee. So these are the trust model is this unintuitive web of agreements about what our industry is willing to accept and move forward on. And as you rightly pointed out, Walt, it's difficult to contemplate a new and different way when everyone has normalized to this incredible heterogeneity to address effectively identical business and industry problems.
Also, it's that everyone has thought of this as a compliance issue or an HR issue,
Mm.
right? They haven't zoomed out and thought of this as provider morale, as patient outcomes, as bottom lines that are being impacted, they haven't been able to see the problem from more than just their seat necessarily. And that's not against people who are in those seats. It's more just that the health system is not talking at that level about this problem and how to figure it out, how to strategically move forward to a new paradigm, because they're like, that's a compliance issue, or like it's an HR issue. Like we don't have to deal with that. And they just kind of like bump it back to the states or the regulatory bodies or primary verifiers or, whoever they can pass the buck to.
Fair. Everyone sitting in their seat is often overwhelmed, has a big backlog, and the way that we structure job descriptions is causal to that. Draw a nice tight box around a human being in their contribution area, and there you go with the silos continuing to play out. So we talked about Vanadium Shield that is establishing the listening functions connected to an indefinite number of endpoints that, in the case of provider credentialing, can be made to flow through and about and include a credentialed provider that is an asset sitting over Web3 identity primitives representing that person. The next thing in line with that is where does that data need to go? How do we know where we sent it, if we sent it somewhere, and to whom, and all of that, everything to do with maybe for a reductionist term, routing. So you have created vanadium diffusion. So let's dig into that a little bit, or define how diffusion works. Who wants to take that one?
Well, maybe let's do it two parts. Let me give some of the history on how we got to diffusion, and then Laura can talk about, really how diffusion differentiates our offering. So when we started this journey 5 years ago, we knew blockchain had to be a part of providing sovereignty around data to the human element at some point. From a baseline functionality, from an innate capabilities perspective, blockchain seemed like it had the answer. And in marching through that process and working with some very astute minds that are shaping the distributed and DeFi world and infrastructure world, and writing the actual language that's running these things, to work on developing an L2/chain for our company, we got to a place where no matter what we did to customize that, to do the things that would speed it up, we still couldn't get it to operate in true real time. It still wasn't what we would call or understand outside of the blockchain or DLT world as scalable, something that could infinitely expand or contract based on need or usage. And that's where we ultimately went back to the drawing board and said, okay, blockchain and distributed ledger technology is definitely a piece of this, but we need something that's going to allow us to speed this whole process up and get it to that human time. And so we spent a good number of months cracking our heads against the wall, metaphorically speaking, to get to a place where we developed our protocol layer named Diffusion. And without getting into the specifics, I'll pass the mic and I'll let Laura give it justice.
I think that's really helpful. And the whole idea of it not being fast enough, not being scalable enough, not being secure enough, like that kind of blockchain trilemma, is something that pretty much any chain has to think through at some point. What are you going to focus on? I think that the really interesting thing there is we did kind of find a way to do all of those things well, and to end up with true real-time data. So the transaction speed went down and down over time. We're currently at 1.1 milliseconds transaction speeds for all different kinds of data. Maybe it's a bit slower for like 8K video, but it would still be in the kind of 1.7 millisecond time frame. So you're not getting much delay there in terms of the size of the data. That's because of how diffusion routes things. It's a layer 0 and a layer 2 protocol. It's not a layer 1. We tested it with about 140 layer 1s, so it's compatible cross-chain. And essentially, it intelligently routes the changes to the data as opposed to all data all the time, which is how it's that fast. So you get kind of a picture at the beginning based on all the data twinning and then changes over time.
That is really that is a remarkable detail that you just shared, Laura, that I think I want to double click on, that highlights Vanadium's culture and values. Something that is constantly, let's say, a drum that never stops beating in our industry is around interoperability, because our entire industry has huge PTSD over the digitization of healthcare that ended up in systems that are not operable, such that we never stop working on interoperability, and maybe we never will. But by adding new layers of technology in, were it not for the kinds of foresight and rigor that you're describing in testing 140 plus L1s against what you've created, what we would be doing by putting in new, additionally interoperable tech into the industry is really worsening an already very problematic situation. And that's a justifiable criticism that I've heard from many parties in accountable positions across the industry that actually go deep on seeking to implement blockchain, and they come up with these problems of I cannot go forward doing this because of this new Web3 version of vendor lock-in.
Yeah.
So I happen to have the pleasure to know you two, and a little bit more about your organization, but that is a use of investment proceeds and a prioritization that almost always gets pushed aside in an early stage company for later, for someday. The fact that you've done that kind of thing now, it speaks volumes, but I'd love to hear what each of you have to say about how and why you prioritized that. Uh, well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here wrestling with how do I answer this first because I had a couple of things ping into my brain, and ultimately the value and the reason that we tried to that we went through that exercise is first and foremost, is this protocol something in and of itself that potentially could help any of these other chains? We went through that exercise and understanding, is this something that is solely vanadium, or can we help the industry in some fashion? So some of this was in some ways trying to understand our place within DLT technologies and blockchain technologies to accurately place where we could assist. Um, Understanding that lots of us inside that world are trying to solve very similar problems. Are there ways that we can help, raise the water level for all the boats? So that's number one. Number two, the other part of that is to what Laura had mentioned, to what you had mentioned, and that is we I wouldn't say hit a brick wall, but recognize that there is a fundamental challenge when it comes to ingrained institutions and regulated industries. That when it comes to adopting something new, it's a monumental shift. And so marching in with that understanding, we knew from the get that we had to make our system work with others, play nicely with others from a concept before trying to walk in and clear the house and rip out and replace. Just conceptually, we knew that if we're going to have any success, we can't go in there and say, hey, you got to take all these things that you're already doing, toss them in the trash and do us. At the end of the day, again, highly regulated industry, lots of years doing it, big monumental challenge. So conceptually for us, it was making sure that we're marching properly, ultimately, and
Yeah.
being conscious of the journey that we're heading on.
Yeah. And just even a thing to add there is specifically for healthcare, if breaches and ransomware have shown us anything, it's that systems cannot be offline, right? This is critical information. So we were not going to be comfortable as a team going into a company and saying, try this, without being able to say, here's all the things we've tried. Here's the ways that we've tested it. We know it works. And, going in a responsible way. As Walt and I have said, this is not our first time going about this, right? Our CEO, Rick Gilchrist, has started 15 or 16 startups. I think we have 30 plus startups and 10 plus exits on our very small team. We're not going to go in somewhere and say, trust us, we're a startup. That doesn't go well very often.
Yeah.
Trust and startup don't often go together in healthcare either. People want you to have a marquee name. They want you to have someone trusted working with you. And so we knew that to get that level of trust from a potential partner, we would need to say, here's all the testing that we've done. Here's all the things that we've tried. We've tried to break it. You go ahead and try now.
Mhm. Oh, and that adds so much necessary cross compatibility for provider credentialing specifically, because you don't, this is talking about a person-centered and portable set of credentials. You don't want to have it only work on a specific L1. And as long as you are using standard conformant Web3 primitives under the hood, you're starting to get from the Web3 community a deeper and broader interoperability capability than certainly exists at baseline in the industry.
Yeah.
And
And that's
that's
throughout. That was true for Shield too, with the listeners. Like they need to be able to work on the cloud. They need to be able to work on-prem. They need to be able to work in hybrid environments. They need to be able to work sometimes attached to bare metal, like they need to have the ability to be truly interoperable by being very, very flexible in what they can do. So that's kind of built in throughout all the layers.
Yeah. And what you said, trust us, we're a startup. That and we're here to solve all of your problems, along with all the consultants. We're all mixed in there. Uh, that's one of the reasons that all of us, like, we met in the context of Government Blockchain Association in the Healthcare and Life Sciences Working Group. And for anyone listening who's not familiar, the GBA, Government Blockchain Association, is, among other things, a standards body and has created something called the blockchain maturity model. The very thesis of that standard is that it is impossible, that all of the blockchain industry has not reached large-scale commercial adoption, which means whether we're talking at a company level or a protocol level, nearly everything but Bitcoin and ETH is a startup, right? So you've got a massive challenge of early stage thinkers, infrastructure assets needing to move into regulated industries. And people don't trust cryptography. They're not cryptographers. They trust human relationships, brands, institutions, and they trust systems of certification or assessment to standards. So GBA's important contribution to this field is the blockchain maturity model that aims to provide empowered decision makers with critical decision support and risk assessment in how they are considering adopting everything in this wide arc of blockchain and Web3. In provider credentialing, uh, as Vanadium advances its mission of creating really scalable and interoperable solutions for credentialing, there will come a time when you are ready to scale those things. Yes. And at that point, having been through the blockchain maturity model assessment framework, and hopefully together with the working group, able to create a new narrow specific supplement around provider credentialing. These things should, we hope, really aid your ability to scale at the time that you feel your organization is ready to scale. Any thoughts about Vanadium's future participation in this blockchain maturity model?
Well, I'll start again with some history and jump into our participation. So as we talked, this is not Laura or I's first rodeo. One of my first companies as an entrepreneur was in 1998 at the dawn of the interweb. And seeing the matriculation of technology, companies coming online, and the Wild West that happened at the beginning, and then how things kind of started to settle and adoption increased. There was during that transitionary 4 or 5 years as things were starting to truly come onto the web, there was a very similar confusion to what we're seeing around blockchain technologies back then around Web 2 technologies and getting to that trust level of, oh, I'm a business, I should have a basic website. Most companies back then would say, well, why do I need to spend the money? I don't understand. Um, but some of what brought that to a level of comfort, not just in the business world, but then on the consumer world, was standardization of some sort. Getting to some level of understanding of this is bad, this is good, do this, not that type of understandings around the basics and framework. BMM, in my book, is helping all of us in this space get to that place where we've got some level of stamp that says, okay, this is right, this is wrong, or this is good, or this is bad, or trust this, or don't trust that. So that as we raise the water level for all ships in this industry, we get some level from an outside perspective, whether by business or consumers, that there's legitimacy here, that the things that people are purporting that their technology does actually does it. And it's not just them and their marketing speak. So, in many ways, from a historical perspective, I'm excited about BMM, and it was one of the reasons we even joined the GBA to begin with, was the inclusion of that kind of standardization and to be able to participate in that first wave, to be an influential organization or participatory in those standards creations through, being evaluating what we're doing. So with that, I'm very excited. I mean, that we're going to be walking through the BMM process ourselves as an organization at some point, hopefully in the near term. But to that point, it's from historical, it's been something I've been very excited about, and I think it bodes well for the industry to have it.
Thanks, Walt. Thanks, Walt. Laura, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I think just in terms of setting standards within any new technology, you're almost saying, okay, here's the conversation we've all had, and here's what we agree on. And even having that conversation to create the standards, I think, moves the technology forward. But seeing that once a standard is adopted, things usually move very, very quickly after that because people have a framework, people have a way to move forward. Um, if you think about some of the even governments that have used blockchain in really interesting ways, like I know that South Korea had their mobile driver's licenses on blockchain. The standard happened first, right? That's the first step to any of this is, okay, we're going to have this standard. We're going to represent vaccines on chain. We're going to represent driver's licenses. We're going to represent diplomas, whatever it is. They create the standard and, as you said, create a very specific supplement for a use case and then are able to say, here's what we've all agreed on. Here's the hard conversations that we've had. Here's some of the stuff that we've hashed out. Here's what we think will work from the people who know it. And then bringing it to people who want to know more, but don't necessarily know everything about it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in standards for a long, long time, the longest with IEEE, particularly as a standards body. And there's this philosophical dispute about whether what you just articulated, Laura, is the right way to architect a standard around an unmet need so that innovation can occur in a framework with capital efficiency on the other side for its participants. Or are we supposed to let de facto standards emerge, essentially making it a very, very, very highly competitive environment with no collaboration among the ecosystem participants in the early days. Then someone wins based on commercial penetration, and then a standard is created. And people feel weirdly passionate about what's right or wrong in those two things in the standards world. I fall in your camp, Laura, where I think it is a waste of resources. It slows down the whole industry's progress to not be able to identify what's pre-competitive among actors in a field, and then create a way to not be completely randomizing the economic buyers on the other side, having to absorb completely distinct or separate frameworks. So it's an honor to be part of bringing that about, here at GBA in due course, including with vanadium. So that's going to be, I think, an important milestone when there is the point in time that all provider orgs or all payer orgs or all state licensing authorities would be able to reference a credentialing supplement to the blockchain maturity model, and have this objective guidepost to execute their decision making. So
There's an interesting thing to just add there
yeah,
that's specific to blockchain standards as opposed to building standards for kind of any technology. When you were talking about kind of almost the Wild West of the market kind of figuring out what makes sense and what doesn't, I think that blockchain has already gone through some of that, right?
sure.
There's history of startups kind of building in stealth and then revealing something, right? Revealing something to the world. And that's kind of how business has gone until blockchain. Because of the transparency involved, a lot of blockchain companies have had to grow through their growing pains in front of everyone. That's why they look messy. That's why they look ridiculous, because they're going through their toddler years as a company on chain where you can see everything. It's so transparent what's happening that that kind of Wild West part, I think, needed to happen for blockchain, but I think that it's happened. I think that we're getting to a place where there's adults in the room and there's a maturity to not just blockchain, but to everyone's understanding of how it could be used. And so you've kind of gone through those growing pains on chain in front of everyone. And now we can like kind of set the standards because that's kind of given us a little bit of, maybe it's both. Maybe that makes me hated by both sides of this controversy. But maybe it's also just kind of both, right? That you're setting standards and going through the growing pains for blockchain.
Well, and that explains, Laura, some of the things that I personally have observed among this community of people is there's a higher level of humility that I observe than average.
Yeah.
Obviously, a very non-scientific statement, but we all know to wade into this space is moving through a next order of uncertainties, and that feeling of tackling really hard things together, and being the people I meet, like the two of you, tend to be intrinsically motivated around the positive impact that their innovation has the potential to bring the world. And that just adds so much to not just the pace of innovation, but the tone and the experience of being part of it. Um, so a couple of questions on diffusion, just for the audience to clarify and disambiguate. So is diffusion an open source protocol today? Just following on your question. Okay. Since you had that to share, I felt like I had to ask the question in follow-up. Is that an intent, or is it a long-term intention to keep it trade secret, or are you planning to go open with it?
Well,
Who takes it?
you go ahead, that's fine.
Let's, again, at the end of the day, we started this to help humanity. I'll start with that statement. So understanding that North Star even above, our goals around data sovereignty, we've had serious conversations about open source and the capacity for releasing this into the wild. Um, I don't think it will stay closed forever. And I'll make that statement. I think we're in a growth trajectory going from where we are in our current seed stage to commercialization, where once commercialized, there may be aspects of it that become open source, very specific to a community. Uh, we've talked about, how do we go about doing that? How do you wrangle the IP ownership? How do you protect what the core offering is, and anything you're working with in a commercial setting it's connected to it. So long-winded way of saying I think we'll open source some aspect of it at some point in time. We don't know the specifics, and I don't want to put it in a box and say anything, on a timeline or anything. But again, given our ultimate North Star of helping the entire world before even trying to solve the business problems, it's ludicrous of us to think that this monumental technology we've created is something just for us, at the end of the day. So, um, I'm not trying to skirt the answer, but at the end, but I'm trying to give you the best possible scenario that I've got.
Yep. No, understood. And just in the defense of closed source, which I'm probably going to receive all kinds of flame mail because I just said those words right then. But thinking back to like the book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and the culture of open source that we are a part of, and where it came from. During that time, in history, mission critical systems were generally not web 1 or web 2 systems. They were they had not yet evolved in the way that they have evolved today. That means that security risks hit all the way to the bone marrow of an organization if they are to be incurred. And there is a real problem by allowing bad guys to understand, and run and operate versions of your code so they can hack on it indefinitely until they figure out a way to break it. And that's a material problem in our industry right now. And
No, it's very,
I'll put that.
I'm following with you. It's part of the reason I answered the question the way that I did. It's like with the audience that we're talking with today and understanding the sensitivity to the protection of the data and understanding where that sits, and that most of the industry is, you know, um, on-prem. They don't want anybody coming in the four walls, and we get that. And so from that perspective, it's very difficult to say in that setting and with those understandings, with those uh, nuances of how people look at that term open source, closed source, to say, that it will be open source at some point, you know. But given our ultimate goal, it's how I have to answer that today. It's given where we are, the understandings in those settings are slowly shifting to a place where they're becoming more malleable to, the fact that Web3, Web4 technologies can handle that level of walls that they want to put up while still being disparate and disconnected. That you're getting that level of confidence in the market that can still occur, that their level that they need to protect things can still be there in a distributed fashion is also part of that challenge in answering that question as well. But let's be frank. So, yeah, that I wanted to concur on that regard because there are some additional challenges when it comes to the state of where the industry has come from and why I answered it in that fashion.
Yeah. So I'd love to let this run long a little bit if you two are all right with that. We are at time, but there's a couple of other questions I had for you. And then for those in attendance, we can still take some Q&A. Does that sound good, Walton, Laura? Um, all right. So there's one other area of vanadium that I want to unpack, and that's around so you've got your diffusion protocol that is doing all of this routing, the multi-party coordination. Um, intrinsically cross-chain interoperable, which is so fantastic. But you still have to take custody, or your customers have to take custody of information, whether in some kind of tightly coupled or loosely coupled off-chain architecture. And then there's what happens with it next. So I understand there is Vanadium Vault as well as another offering. I'd love for you to have the opportunity to unpack how is Vanadium Vault differentiated, and maybe also how is it distinct from, let's say, industry ideas like a decentralized web node, for instance, or other compute and storage modalities. Laura, looks like we'll start with you on that one.
Sure. I think the easiest way to think of it is it's a wallet. So if you think of a crypto wallet, it is a wallet. It is a multi-signature wallet if you want it to be. It can do all of the normal crypto things of show you a crypto balance and do swaps and give you your history and all of that stuff. But the real power comes from the fact that the data and the monetization and the store of value are together in the wallet, which means that you can actually monetize data. You can very easily monetize data if they're both in the same place, co-located and attached to each other. So essentially, this is a wallet that lets you store value. It lets you store data in the form of NFTs and SBTs, and I can talk about what SBTs are for kind of the non-blockchain enthusiasts. But it essentially allows you to put all kinds of different information in there that normally would not be in your wallet. And it means that if I put in all of my healthcare records and I had Lyme disease as a child, I could actually participate in a clinical trial that wants to look at longitudinal effects of Lyme disease. And just by sharing my healthcare data and going to regular checkups, I could actually receive money for that clinical trial. I could receive money for my data very easily. I could give that very securely access to my data, and I could revoke it when the study is done. And you would know that it's truly not anywhere after you revoke it. So having those things together, I think, is really, really important to how we do what we do. And that's essentially, that's where we create the credentials. That's where they're stored. They're stored as SBTs, like I said. The quick aside there is that an SBT is a soul-bound token. It's a NFT. NFTs are any way of creating information about real-world things on chain. An NFT can be traded. An SBT cannot. So if I hand you my driver's license, it doesn't make you the owner of the driver's license. It just means that you're viewing it. Same kind of thing with an SBT. If I give you an SBT, it doesn't mean you own it. It just means you're looking at it or sharing it or securely accessing it for some reason.
Mm-hmm. I love that we've added to this idea of sovereignty and self-sovereignty coming out of political theory. We've now, thanks to Vitalik's brilliant paper on SBTs, we've started to include a spiritual terminology,
Yeah.
but super significant construct to understand from a tokenization perspective, and that all makes a lot of sense. So just putting in my own words, the rationale for developing your own wallet rather than taking an off-the-shelf open source wallet asset was so that you could change the data storage and architecture within the wallet, and probably check many other boxes too, like you wanted multi-sig, and you might have some novel ideas about implementing multi-sig, given the diffusion protocol, if I were guessing. And for healthcare folks who may be listening to this, most or by default, Web3 wallets, you have a public key and a private key. That's just two keys. The holder of the private key is necessary to access what's in any transaction or wallet. in our industry, in healthcare and life sciences, if we are building mission critical systems, critical infrastructure, and ever a reliance on these apparatus, which is, there would be no purpose in our industry to adopt them any other way. So a multi-sig wallet means that another party or parties also possesses a private key, that in the event you lost your private key, there is a recovery and a restore and a support model. And from a compliance perspective, you have to know who those parties are. They have to bear risk. There's no applicability for a 100% peer-to-peer only kind of transaction when you've got regulated actors in the midst of those things. So that comes up all the time at this intersection of healthcare and blockchain, where, let's say, radical purists, for the most radical interpretation of what Web3 can mean, get very upset about anything that starts to look custodial. So this is this balanced pragmatism that we find here in this working group and within Vanadium. Another example of thinking through the industry with great clarity. So very interesting around Vault. Now with do you have a framework where Vault and Diffusion and Shield are being separately commercialized, where they would run independent of each other? Or what's your concept of how these would be bundled in practice?
You want to take that, Will?
Sure. So our bundling is kind of use case specific, is probably the easiest way to answer that question. So based on the use case, I would answer it a couple of different ways, and very specific to healthcare, understanding some of our background and where we've come from, having each of the components in play for us was kind of the three pillars of how we execute in that scenario. In order to be able to provide the level of endpoint, namely the patient, access to information, portability of information, and protection of that information that's theirs, connected to a system that can move that information effectively and communicate with all the other systems effectively in a compliant and a protected fashion. For us, those were kind of the three legs of the stool. And if we didn't have one of those components, the stool would fall over. Take that into a different industry, and we may take one of those legs off because it's not necessarily necessary. So kind of a roundabout answer that specific to healthcare, this was very purposeful how we've packaged these components and modules to answer the need. And we've actually been remiss in not answering the fourth leg of the stool, and that is our agentic AI, which in many ways is the front door, the access point for the patient, the hospital, anybody accessing that information will have an agent in front of them that they can conversationally, hey, I'm trying to find out why I can't sleep on Thursday nights. Well, agentic AI looks at all your information inside your vault and says, well, I'm sorry, Walt, but it shows here that you're going to Starbucks at 3 o'clock every afternoon and buying a 6-pound cup of coffee. Might have something to do with why you need to adjust your meds at nighttime to be able to fall asleep. And so being able to have that interaction conversationally as a front door, both to a patient and then ultimately to an enterprise, where they can draw correlations between disparate systems. An easy example we talk about often inside of healthcare is right now, when we're looking at the spectrum of how do we improve care, many of the conversations are around specifically care-related exercises or activities, and may not completely pull in all the aspects they may be having impact. An easy example that has been brought to us and we consequently use is a specific hospital that was having a particular ward within that hospital where the patients were having issues, and I won't get into specifics, at specific times of day. And the correlation there was that the HVAC system would come on, waking all the patients up, causing disruption in their sleep patterns, and then therefore having a downward trickling effect on the outcomes for those patients. And they never would have seen that it was the HVAC system kicking on at 3 o'clock every morning that was the advent of that trickle effect without having access to view all the systems and not just focusing on caregiving or patient care as how do we solve this. So that's the other aspect where this comes into play, and having the agentic AI involved with all of our sensors gives us the ability to look at vast amounts of disparate data and go, hey, here's the needle in the haystack of where something could change that might have an impact you haven't thought of.
Mm-hmm. And this is called Vanadium IQ, correct?
Right.
Yep. And that intelligence discovery interrogation layer over all of this disparate decentralized data that Vanadium is listening to and able to visualize. It's very exciting and very timely, and introduces another layer of complexities, of course, on the another topic near and dear to the heart of the Healthcare and Life Sciences Working Group, which is how blockchain can be used to establish the guardrails themselves for agentic systems and compliance and ethical and including bioethical risk management. That is a different conversation, but a tight adjacency that would probably be really interesting to unpack. So with that, I want to pause the conversation for a moment, make an announcement on behalf of the GBA, and then come back to you with the following and final question, which is, as you are doing all of this work toward the Vanadium suite of products and its readiness, particularly for provider credentialing in our heavily regulated industry, what are the process points? Where are you now? What are you looking for next? And how can the broader GBA community and the healthcare ecosystem support you in those aims? Now, to pause our regular scheduled programming, I want to let the audience know about a tremendous event that the GBA is producing. For those of you that are participating on Zoom, I just put in the chat the website. This is the Future of Money, Governance, and the Law. It is taking place on October 30th of this year on Capitol Hill. And you can see the schedule in the URL I put in. If you are hearing this or you are listening live on one of the live streaming, you can find this at gbaglobal.org/FOMG for Future of Money, Governance, and the Law. Registration is going to fill up soon. The GBA's events in person have been, in my experience over the years, remarkable opportunities for people from many different disciplines, from the public and private sector, to come together around innovation, around impact, and around the values-driven approach that everyone is seeking to see as we realize broader and broader value propositions for blockchain and Web3 technologies. You'll note, in the interest of healthcare and life sciences, our working group will have part of the content in that event, and you will be able to meet many of us from the working group there. So with that, please do check out gbaglobal.org/FOMG and join us on October 30th on Capitol Hill for the Future of Money, Governance, and the Law. Weighty pause. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. So I'd love to know where you are, what's next for Vanadium. Who wants to take that one first?
I'm pointing to Laura.
I think being
We
pointed
all
to.
point in different directions when we do that, right? Because our cameras are
That's not
random.
it.
Right. It's like the Brady Bunch thing going on.
Yeah.
I can take that. So essentially where we are now, we have the tech stack that we've talked about, we have a product suite, we have a commercial MVP of all of those things with lots and lots of testing, as we've talked about. Um, the next stage for us is to commercialize this with hopefully a design partner that can help us to shape what this looks like in the industry. So we know that we are not healthcare natives. We have a lot of healthcare advisors. We have some kind of experience at the fringes of healthcare, but we know that we're going to need to shape this with people who are true insiders. So that's the next stage for us, is identifying and working with design partners who can be that first mover and are okay with the risk of being the first mover, are innovative and ready to do that. Obviously, they get to shape things in return, and they get to really see how this will play out in the industry. Um, and I think hand in hand with that is figuring out, not figuring out, but contributing to the standards that are being shaped for credentialing specifically, and then for healthcare in a broader sense through GBA. A lot of the conversations that we're having are also just kind of discovery conversations. So I would say if you're listening and you have specific thoughts on credentialing or experiences, or want to vent about how hard it is or any of that, we are very happy to have conversations about this. And all of those help us to shape what this solution becomes and try and make it something that's truly impactful for people.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. And I'm sure as you move from stage to stage in your company, all of us in the GBA community and in the healthcare community broadly are going to be very excited to see what comes from this remarkable team at Vanadium. Uh, Before, I think we've got time for maybe one really great question from the audience, and then we will go ahead and sign off for the day. I'll offer you the opportunity for a quick closing remark to each of you before we take the last question and close out. Walt, how about you go first?
But as a closing statement, I want to say thanks to both you, Heather, both for your guidance and leadership through this process, and your friendship. And thank you to the GBA. That's, you've already stated, and I'm going to concur, the in-person events are of extreme value, is what we have found. And the people that have been involved, even more specifically with the working groups, have been some of the most enjoyable people to interact with, astute and their understandings of some of the challenges, and really trying to offer solutions. And being surrounded by individuals that are trying to raise the water level for everybody is, at the end of the day, why we're doing this. So I want to say again, it's a genuine thank you to the GBA, to the BMM, to the member companies, to the Healthcare Working Group for allowing us to be a part of this journey with you.
That is so kind. Thank you so much, Walt, for your kind words. Uh, Laura?
I honestly, just echoing Walt. It really is thank yous, because this is not no startup is going through this alone, right? And the collaborative approach that we've seen with GBA and member companies and the conversations that we've had, those have been truly transformative in figuring out how we go to market, what this looks like, how we make this impactful for the most people, and everyone kind of having the same ideas about not just the power of this as a technology, but the transformative nature and how it could actually make things better in healthcare has been really just super impactful as we have gone through creating our roadmap. So yeah, just thank you to GBA, thank you to you, Heather, and I, very much agree with Walt that this has been amazing.
That's wonderful to hear. We're gonna extract this last little bit and play it on repeat all over the place, just so
Perfect.
everyone, everyone's aware. Um, all right. One quick question that we'll just squeeze in here. And this comes from an audience member wanting to know, we're using this term self-sovereignty, and we use it in terms of identity, we use it in terms of data. Um, I use it in terms of AI, self-sovereign AI as well. Uh, is there a recognized standard for this? And are we speaking the same language when we're using this term out in the world among Web3 people or among healthcare people? That was my elaboration on the question, but I think it's fair. Uh, any who wants to jump on that first?
It's a great question. Some of the healthcare systems that we've spoken with, we've sort of thrown out the self-sovereign idea, and they do get very hung up on, well, who owns the data? Do we not own our data anymore? Do you own the data? Who owns the data? Um, and others that we've spoken to have said, maybe we don't want to own the data. Maybe we don't want to be subject to ransomware attacks. Maybe we want the liability to be somewhere else. Maybe we want the locus of control to be somewhere else. So I think that there's a real conversation happening there of who owns the data and how they do it. When we talk about it, we mean that data is owned by the originators of the data. So if it's my blood work, I own my blood work results. Um, I think that you start to get into some really interesting gray areas when you think about an EKG result, because who owns the EKG system? Who's running the EKG system? Who's attached to it? Those are all questions that we absolutely, I think, need to, as an industry, figure out. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a vanadium question of like, who owns this, as much as a standards question and trying to figure out where we land on that. I think it's a really interesting kind of spectrum that we could end up with.
I so want to riff on all that you just had to say, but but Walt, what would you like to add first? I'm just gonna.
I'm definitely could riff on this. We could do a whole nother talk just on this. What I would say is that in the journey over the last 5 years of working on this challenge, the idea of self-sovereignty or sovereignty of your own data uh, and throwing that out to people and seeing their reactions. Uh, to Laura's point, I don't know that it's relegated only to healthcare, number one. But number two, I think it's a much larger societal conversation. Today, we take this out of healthcare, even in the context of the social media world. Today, you're the product. That data, they're making money off of you. If we took that basic marketing data and I had ownership of it and I sold it to those same companies that are buying it once a year, once a month for 12 months, the income stream that would come to Walt based on the data that I'm originating would be life changing, would completely change the conversation when it comes to your universal basic income and some subsistence level of income for those around the world. If that data that the population is creating, they had complete ownership over it, the monetization behind it changes the dynamic of, again, just take the social setting, and the income that could come off of being a product of Facebook or whatever social platform versus me owning that data and me selling it to Facebook's marketing research, whatever.
Mhm.
So uh, you, depending on the scenario, depending on where that understanding is being introduced, I see different levels of um, openness, I guess is what I'm when I, is the word I want to latch onto, because um, to the point of even just hospitals and healthcare, and what Laura just said, sometimes they're looking at us going, wait, what? We don't have that? That's not ours anymore? Well, let's be clear, it's not yours right now, and you really don't have much of I mean, most of the hospital care healthcare systems we talked to today, one of the biggest black holes is data, and most of them don't have the access that they think that they do. So Again, I think it's dependent on the industry that we're talking about. To Laura's point, I think it's a much larger societal conversation, quite frankly.
Mhm. Uh, so just a couple of really quick remarks on that. I think the three of us on this in this interaction right now have a common definition of self-sovereignty, but the word originator, I use that differently.
Mm,
So in your example, Laura, about your lab data, I would describe you as the data subject and say LabCorp or Quest as the originator. Now, I'm not saying right or wrong. I use originator as the party that operates IT systems where
Yeah.
data is generated and captured, who often also have data retention policies and allowable use. And data is like land in that there are multiple rights and claims to the same asset,
mm,
and copies of it. You can't copy land, but you can copy data, and that gets all crazy in the compliance world. But I just think it's really noteworthy that I know we mean the same thing when we say self-sovereign, but in our explanation of it, we're using a different semantic set of assumptions. It just underscores how challenging it is for our industry to come together because we're all doing our best to arrive at what makes the most sense to communicate with. But it does call out how great it can be when more organizations are collaborating and deciding what we mean when we say originator, for example. And I'm not hard over about it. The main thing is that we're not trying to educate the same person with a different definition because it doesn't benefit either in any party to do it that way. But I wasn't expecting that. And I was like, oh my, here we are. Um, very, very interesting. I also think it bears mentioning that there are parties in our industry who really passionately lobbied against elements of the 21st Century Cures Act that have to do with their anti-information blocking provisions. And that lobbying activity was represented by a large swath of the healthcare establishment that had sweeping concerns about possible negative ramifications to individual data subjects obtaining under their own custody copies of their information versus being able to log in and view information resident on another party's infrastructure. So there's a lot of work to do in our industry to navigate those different points of view, business interests, or ethical concerns. Um, the good work that's ahead of us, right?
right.
Um, all right, so this has been the GBA monthly public webinar of the Healthcare and Life Sciences Working Group, July 2025. We look forward to seeing you again in August of 2025. Very special thanks to GBA member company Vanadium and to Walt and Laura for sharing their story and their progress with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.